Netflix has stated on the record that it considers HBO to be its biggest competitor, but now in a letter to shareholders just earlier this week, Netflix points out that there's another viable threat: pirates.
In 2020, piracy was supposed to be dead. A relic, a fossil, a problem solved so completely that tech journalists held its funeral. For a brief moment, it seemed like one of the internet's oldest battles had finally ended. The pirates hadn't been defeated by courts or lawsuits or FBI warnings. They'd been defeated by convenience, by simplicity, by a single subscription that finally made legal access easier than the illegal alternative. But 4 years later, something impossible happened. Piracy didn't just return, it detonated. By 2024, visits to pirate sites surged past 216 billion. More than before Netflix even existed. More than the peak of torrent culture. More than the worst days the entertainment industry had ever seen. And the twist was brutal. This wasn't caused by hackers or criminals or shady corners of the internet. It was caused by the streaming companies themselves. Because to understand how piracy came back from the dead, you first have to understand how streaming once made it irrelevant. There was a moment in the early 2010s when Netflix delivered something that felt impossible. It brought order to chaos. At a time when cable was a labyrinth of hidden fees, inflexible schedules, and predatory contracts, Netflix was shockingly simple. One app, one subscription, one endless library, a doorway into movies and shows from every studio, every network, every corner of entertainment. You paid $8 and you got everything. No ads, no bundles, no premium tiers. It felt like the entire entertainment world had finally agreed to share the same room. For the first time ever, the legal option wasn't just convenient, it was better, cleaner, faster, safer, easier. And the impact was instant. Torrent traffic plummeted. Pirate sites went dark from lack of use. Forums emptied out. Even veteran pirates admitted they'd stopped bothering because it was easier to just open Netflix. Streaming didn't win with force. It won with value. But value is a fragile thing. And the moment Netflix proved streaming could work, every major studio decided they didn't want to be part of Netflix's empire. They wanted to build their own. That's when fragmentation began. What started as a shared ecosystem shattered into a dozen competing kingdoms almost overnight. Disney pulled its catalog and launched Disney+. Warner launched HBO Max, then rebranded it as Max. NBC created Peacock. Paramount built Paramount+. Discovery created its own service, then merged and re-merged with Warner in a corporate game of musical chairs. Movies and shows vanished from Netflix like a collapsing universe. Entire library sections were hollowed out. Beloved favorites migrated to exclusive homes. What had been simple became complicated. What had been unified became fractured. And for the first time, customers felt the strain. If you wanted The Office, you needed Peacock. If you wanted Friends, you needed HBO Max. If you wanted Marvel or Star Wars, you needed Disney+. If you wanted Star Trek, you needed Paramount+. If you wanted sports, you needed yet another bundle. If you wanted Yellowstone, you needed patience, a guidebook, and divine intervention. The promise of everything in one place was gone. The convenience that killed piracy evaporated. And the bill for fragmentation kept climbing. Prices rose, then rose again and again. $8 became $10. $10 became $15. $15 became $20. Add-ons appeared. Annual plans jumped. And the average household found itself juggling 5 or 6 subscriptions just to watch what it used to find in one place. By 2023, Americans were paying more for streaming than cable had ever cost. And yet people tolerated it. Not happily, not enthusiastically, but because they still believed streaming was the lesser evil. They believed the value was still there, barely, if you squinted. But then came the year everything broke. Streaming's breaking point didn't arrive with a single dramatic moment. It arrived with a series of betrayals. The first betrayal was ads. For a decade, streaming defined itself as the antidote to advertising. Unlimited, uninterrupted viewing. That was the whole pitch. But suddenly, nearly every platform introduced ad-supported tiers, and not gentle, occasional ads. Full breaks, pre-rolls, mid-rolls, entire clusters of commercials jammed into shows that once played clean. What had been the standard experience, quietly became a luxury. Paying more didn't give you better content. It simply restored the experience you used to get by default. Then came the password-sharing crackdown. Netflix had spent years encouraging families to share accounts. It was part of the company's identity. But in 2023, they reversed course. Password sharing became a monetized offense. Viewers who had watched together for years suddenly found themselves locked out, forced into new subscriptions. It wasn't just inconvenient, it was hypocritical. And people don't forget hypocrisy. Then came the strangest betrayal of all. Content started disappearing. Entire shows, finished shows, expensive shows, beloved shows, vanished from platforms overnight. Not because of licensing deals, not because of contracts expiring, but because studios discovered they could save money by deleting them. Not archiving, not rotating, deleting. Imagine buying a book, and the bookstore quietly enters your home at night to remove it from your shelf, because it's cheaper for them if the book doesn't exist anymore. Streaming stopped feeling like ownership, stopped feeling like access, stopped feeling reliable. It became a shifting landscape of temporary, unstable content, something you couldn't trust. And once trust collapses, viewers look for alternatives. Piracy returned not because the pirates got stronger, but because the platforms got weaker. And when it returned, it didn't look anything like the piracy people remembered. Modern. Pirate platforms were fast, clean, organized. They had better search tools than most streaming apps, better recommendations, better libraries, better stability. Some even kept track of your progress better than the platforms you paid for. The illegal option had evolved into the more convenient option, and viewers noticed, especially the youngest ones. 2/3 of Gen Z pirated content in 2024, and the majority of them were still paying for streaming. They weren't pirating to avoid paying. They were pirating because paying no longer solved the problem. When content is spread across a dozen platforms, people pirate. When shows disappear overnight, people pirate. When prices rise faster than value, people pirate. When companies break their promises, people pirate. Piracy isn't rebellion, it's practicality. By 2024, analysts delivered a forecast that rattled Hollywood's core. If nothing changed, streaming platforms were on track to lose $13 billion a year to piracy by 2027. $13 billion. Lost not to criminals, but to bad decisions. Inside the boardrooms, panic crept in. Budgets were slashed. Entire departments were downsized. Thousands of employees were laid off. Green lights for new shows were frozen. Completed projects were canceled before they saw the light of day. Whole libraries were written off for tax savings. Platforms merged, rebranded, and restructured in a frantic scramble to stop the bleeding. The industry that once promised unlimited access had become a fortress of guarded content and shrinking catalogs. The war of the streaming giants, Disney versus Netflix, Max versus Prime Video, Paramount versus everyone, had created the perfect environment for the enemy they thought they'd defeated forever. Because the truth was simple. Streaming didn't fall because piracy evolved. Streaming fell because streaming abandoned the very principles that once made it great. People weren't leaving because competitors were better. They were leaving because the platforms themselves were getting worse. Convenience was gone. Value was gone. Trust was gone. And when you take away the things that make customers stay, they leave. Not overnight, not dramatically, but inevitably. People didn't choose piracy because it was free. They chose it because it respected their time, because it respected their choices, because it offered stability in a world where streaming no longer did. Streaming companies forgot the single rule that defined their rise: make the legal option easier than the illegal one. Instead, they created a world where the illegal option became the easier path. And that's the tragedy at the heart of this entire story. The streaming war didn't end in a dramatic final battle. It ended quietly, slowly, choice by choice, fee by fee, restriction by restriction, until the audience made the only decision left that made sense. The streaming war is over, and pirates won, not because they were clever, but because streaming. Companies stopped listening. People didn't choose the free option. They chose the option that respected them. And when an entire industry forgets the value of that, when it forgets the promise that made it successful, it doesn't get defeated by competition. It gets defeated by itself. Streaming didn't lose to piracy. Streaming recreated the world that made piracy necessary. And in the end, that's how an industry writes its own ending.